to the CX Pulse podcast. I'm your host, Amelia Rose Earhart. On today's show, we speak with guest expert Shawn Nason, CEO and founder and Chief Experience Officer at MOFI, a human-obsessed, maverick-minded design firm. Shawn, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here, Amelia. Love it.
Boy, you've got quite a background, from all of your work with MOFI to your background as a Disney Imagineer. You describe yourself as an experience evangelist and an advocate for people-first business. So as we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about what that means and really what you do?
Well, thank you. Yeah, and so the term experience evangelist has just come from, I think, my past work. I was a pastor for many years, so I have a little bit of that still in me, or a lot of it still in me. And what I realized in the industry is people didn't need to have more tools or more slides. What they needed was encouragement. And then during the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, my biggest takeaway around that is we had lost touch with humanity in the CX space. And I think we became so tech enamored that we started to forget about the humans. And so right now, as the experience evangelist, I am saying loud and preaching loud, how do we humanize experience again?
Boy, I agree. We're so used to Zoom call after Zoom call after Zoom call. We kind of get into these ruts. So let's transition into the customer experience space. Tell us how you got into that world and then how these types of ideas can help improve the overall customer experience.
Well, I tell people I fell into this. I was a musician for years. As I mentioned, I was a pastor. And after coming out of that, my very first corporate job landed me in Orlando, Florida, where we lived. And my wife looked at me and said, "Why don't you go to work for Disney?" And I said, "That's great. I just don't want to do entertainment anymore." And so I actually fell into a role at Disney in finance, in their finance organization, not knowing that I was getting thrust into customer experience or in Disney's World Guest Experience. I fell into it. And I was never an on-stage cast member. I was always a backstage cast member at Disney. But that's, I think, what was so beautiful about it is, even though I did not work with the guests, I was taught in my time at Disney that everything that I did backstage mattered just as much as what was happening on stage. And so I was very fortunate, had an amazing career at Disney that moved me from in the finance organization to Disney Cruise Line, then ultimately becoming a Walt Disney Imagineer. And for those that don't know that, Imagineers are the creative buzz for all of Disney. What that then exposed me to was incredible. So for your first corporate job, here I worked for Disney. I thought every company was like this. And then I was recruited into healthcare and went to an amazing company as well, Humana, and did member experience. And they were on the up and coming. And so it's just kind of fell into my lap. And I realized it was my passion. And I actually look back in my career as a musician and as a pastor, and we did nothing but build experiences for people. And so looking back on it, that's how this all just kind of fell in my lap.
That totally makes sense, because with your background in the church world, you're right. It is all about that experience for your churchgoers. And then with Disney, that's a brand that we all associate with, the guest must be happy, right? It's all about their experience. And that's why people are such consistent, brand ambassadors for the Disney brand, because you all made it so great. So I bet that had a lot to do with you creating MOFI, because you've described it as a human-obsessed boutique design firm passionate about reimagining experience ecosystems. Tell us what that experience ecosystem means and really what MOFI stands for.
It was in 2020 during the pandemic with my best friend and business associate, Michael, and we were walking and we were just talking through reimagining the next iteration of MOFI. So MOFI stands for Man on Fire Innovation. He said, "What is it that made Disney magical and how they do experience?" And we started talking about it. And he said, "So it's an ecosystem approach." And I'm like, holy cow, yes. And even Disney doesn't even talk about it that way. That's not how Disney even talks about what they do. But when we talk about the experience ecosystem, one of the things that we talk about are all the things that happen within an ecosystem. And so people look at it, and we define it very simple as an experience ecosystem is the web of people, touch points, and systems that combine to define the experiences everyone who interacts with an organization. So we have a sample of one on our website at MOFI, and our sample one talks about customer, digital, supply chain, leadership and culture, marketplace awareness, vendor relations, brand loyalty and messaging, and employee experience. All of that wraps into the employee experience. And we go on to say that to leverage experience as a competitive advantage, because let's be real, right now in the world you hear more about experience than anything. And how do you become competitive in that space? And using this approach increases engagement, loyalty, and revenue year after year. But it requires engaging and humanizing the entire ecosystem. And I am a huge fan of digital and technology when it is an enabler and not a means of doing away with something. And this past year, it became really real to me. I was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer on April 15th of 2022. And someone who works in the experience space, I will tell you, I didn't want a bunch of digital technology during that journey. I wanted face-to-face interaction with my oncologist, with my surgeon, with my nurses. So we have done ourselves an injustice in the experience world, and I call it the experience world because we have preached digital transformation for so long that we have really left the human out. And that's where we came up with human obsessed. We have to become human obsessed again, and allow all those things that we just talked about to be enablers to make a better human experience.
Right. Well, and Shawn, thank you so much for sharing those details about your personal life. And I'm really sorry to hear that you're going through that. You know, another one of your big areas of expertise is tearing down experience silos. And I'm sure your background in healthcare is where a lot of this comes from. Can you tell us a little bit about those silos and why it's so important that we begin tearing them down really across all industries?
Yeah, so I had this huge aha when I worked at Humana, because here we were doing a ton of work in the member experience space, but then we had a chief innovation officer and they were working on something. And then you had HR who was working on employee experience, right? And I remember sitting probably 1.5 to 2 years into my journey at Humana in a meeting, and all 3 of those areas presented very similar projects and topics that they had been working on. But no one knew in those areas that they were working on them. And I realized at that point, we have an immense amount of silos created. We just build these silos up and these kingdoms, particularly in corporate America, even more so than anywhere, of, well, this is this person's responsibility and this person's responsibility and this person's responsibility. And it goes back to my Disney days. When I worked on a project at Disney, the core project team for every project had all representation at the table. So there was creative, there was finance, there was HR, there was operations, legal. Everyone sat at the table and made decisions as a group and as a project team. And there was no silos in that because everyone knew what everyone was doing. And that's when it became a huge passion of mine and has become a huge passion of ours at MOFI to say, you have to break down these silos. Because it's a huge waste of money within companies.
You're so right. I would say throughout the pandemic and the increase in the work from home environment, those silos have probably strengthened a lot because we don't have the opportunity to share our knowledge and see where that overlap lies as much, but we have to do it intentionally.
We've seen a very prime example of this in the news recently. And we're going to go back to Disney. Disney, the beginning of this year, released their CEO, Bob Chapek, and brought former CEO Bob Iger back. And I was there at Disney when the transition happened between Michael Eisner and Bob Iger. And he's taken some controversy because just recently he said that beginning in March, all cast members are coming back to the office 4 days a week. And I've heard lots of stuff. And I'm telling you from a person, an former cast member, former Walt Disney Imagineer, there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is to bring back the Disney magic that so many people said the company had lost. Do I believe work from home can happen? Absolutely. But I believe in this critical time in Disney's stage, bringing cast members back together, having them work together. I could not imagine, if I would have been working at Disney during the pandemic, how you would not collaborate if you weren't in person. I remember just working on so many projects where we would meet at the project site and we would brainstorm there. And so that, to me, is a prime example of what needs to happen. You have to evaluate. Do I think it'll be permanent? No. Do I think they'll figure something out? Bob is brilliant at that. Yes. But he's bringing it back to get the culture right and get the cast member experience right again.
Do you think, to our listeners who work in different industries outside of the Disney world and outside of the healthcare world, is it possible to bring back that magic by implementing different sorts of technology or different practices to improve their overall ecosystem?
Yeah, and I don't want to knock technologies because, you and I are recording this podcast. We're sitting on Zoom. We're seeing each other. We're in different cities. It's great. Like, it's amazing when it's used for the right purposes. And as I said before, as an enabler, not an answer.
Right.
And like I said, in healthcare, it's great to put technology into patients' hands or into providers' hands if it gets them back to doing the human experience more. Because the last thing doctors and nurses want to do is administrative work. They want to take care of people. So if it's an enabler to help that, awesome. For us, the biggest tool, our grounding tool at MOFI, is a term, human-centered design. In the business world, some people call it design thinking. But we use human-centered design. I think that's a tool that everyone in business needs to be equipped with today, is to understand what that is. And unfortunately, empathy is a word that's getting thrown around a ton, but people don't truly understand what empathy is. You can be sympathetic with somebody, but to be empathetic is a completely different space. And I didn't realize that. My wife wants to be there and has wanted to be there for me on my journey, but she can't walk in those shoes because she doesn't have cancer. She doesn't understand what that's like. So can you learn empathy? Yes, I believe you can. We actually built a deck called the Empathy Workout. We believe it's a muscle. You can learn to have empathy and understand it, but let's not use it as a throwaway word. And let's get back to that human-centered space.
Oh my gosh, you're so right. It's about that perspective shifting and truly asking and being willing to listen and say, what is your experience like? Tell me what it's like to be you, right? And then making changes from that point. So if there was one big idea that you would want organizations and leaders of CX listening to this episode to take away, what would it be from our conversation today? How can they start improving from here?
Go walk in your customers, your employees' day-to-day life. When I work with companies and I hear senior executives say, we need to change this and we need to do this, and we're going to make this decision, and you ask them, have you asked how that will impact your front line or your customer? And they say no, that disheartens me. I hate to go back to Disney, but if you went on social media, you saw so many TikToks, so many Instagram posts, because what was Bob Iger doing? He's out walking the parks. He's talking to guests. He's listening to cast members. If Bob Iger can do it, anybody can do it. And I've been very fortunate to work with a very amazing mentor. His name is Shawn Nason. And he says, if you don't spend time with your front line, if you don't spend time with your members, customers, patients, whatever you want to call them, as a C-suite person, you are not doing a justice to your organization.
Boy, Shawn, I have really enjoyed our conversation today. You've got such a varied background and so many great insights. And I really appreciate you sharing your personal experience with stepping into that patient role, in such a firsthand way and being so open about that. So thank you. And as we wrap up here, I want you to have the chance to tell everybody where they can learn more about you. Check out your website, which is so bright, so colorful. I can tell right away that you've got that Disney background, hearing your set and also on your website. And then also you've got your podcast, Combustion Chronicles, which I know folks are going to want to check out as well. So why don't you let them know where they can get in touch?
Yeah, so a couple things. I'm on all social media, but I really focus on LinkedIn. You can go out and just type in Shawn Nason. Follow me, connect with me on LinkedIn. I do a lot of influencing in that space. You can go to shawnnason.com, or you can go to MOFI, MOFI.co. So that's not com, but .co for MOFI. You can find out about MOFI, or you can go to my personal website, get you there. As you can tell, I'm passionate about this. I want to see a change and a revolution in the world, and I'm excited to pour into people's lives to make that happen.
Well, we can definitely tell, and we can hear it in the passion in your voice. So Shawn, thank you so much for being on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us on the CX Pulse podcast. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a 5-star review. This podcast is brought to you by NICE, the world's leading cloud CX platform. Go to nice.com to learn more about our innovative and comprehensive end-to-end CX solutions. That's nice.com.